Lisa, we
Yes.
are really happy to have you this week, and thank you. You've been like a loyal supporter coming every week to these things, which I really appreciate. So in the background, we can see, I love that movie. So tell me about this podcast that you do, and how did you start doing this podcast?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I am so glad that you started doing this because I, just like so many other people, I was like, what am I going to do? I can't go to the movies. I can't, go out. I can't see my friends. And this has just been such an awesome event that we can all attend digitally and talk about film. And my podcast is called I Love That Movie because each week I have a guest and the guest chooses a movie. We then both go watch it, I research it, and then I have them on and we just chat about it. So it's not really like a straightforward review. It's not an unbiased opinion or a critique. It's just two people kind of gushing about how much they like a film. And the thought process there was just that there's so many podcasts that I've heard that are just so, I mean, some of them can be so angry and so negative. And I mean, I've got opinions too. Everybody does. But I was getting to a point where it's like, what can I do different? And how do you put something out there that everybody can enjoy? And I thought, what if we just focus on movies that people love? And that way, all they do is gush about it for an hour, and it can kind of be a break for everybody. And so that's why I started it. And we've been doing it for about 3 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy like that. I never imagined it would go it would go on this long or that I would continue, but I don't know, I love doing it, and there's so many movies out there to talk about. I just don't get tired of it, and so I'm just glad that people listen and that they want to be on it.
So, so let's start with this week's film, Roma. Why did you choose this film?
So I had been watching the behind the scenes, looking at all the news that came out about this movie. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Alfonso Cuarón's work. I think the first movie that I saw that I was like, wow, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit when we talk about this film was Y tu Mama También.
Yeah.
And then another movie that really just stuck with me was Children of Men.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then, I'm a big Harry Potter fan, and Prisoner of Azkaban is the best movie. You heard it here first. No, but I love that film, and Gravity too. I even feel that Interstellar kind of stole some of the fire that Gravity got. It's like people only think about that movie because, I don't know, it's flashier, but I love Gravity. And so I was interested in this movie. And then, of course, it came out on Netflix, and I watched it, and I just couldn't believe like how amazing it was. And it was kind of like Parasite, in the way that you watch it and you just leave feeling like you had an experience and just so much to digest. I think that anybody that thinks this movie is like too slow or boring, it needs some context. And if they had that, I think it would really change how they view this movie. But that plus, he got Best Director that year. And I think that's so huge for a movie like this that's not about the typical story that wins an Oscar. So just all those things. I was like, oh, I can't wait. I can finally talk about this film. Nobody's picked it on my show yet, so I can't do it on my show.
So let's talk about, I mean, one of the things before you get into the details of the film, and there's a lot of things, obviously to talk about, that because this film was shown on Netflix and it did have a very, very, very short theatrical run, it caused a lot of controversy because a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people believe that it shouldn't have been considered for an Academy Award. There was AMC did not want to run it. I mean, there was all kinds of pushback because this really, I think, was a kind of turning point of, sort of Netflix getting A-list directors, creating original media, and sort of taking a swipe at movie theaters.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about all of that?
Well, I had read that the main reason why Alfonso Cuarón picked Netflix was that he knew that foreign language films do not usually get great distribution in America. So by releasing it on Netflix, it guarantees that many people will have the chance to see it. Because I think, one bad thing about big movie studios is that, they decide what they're going to release based on how well they think it's going to do, how well people are going to like it. They're guessing essentially. And I think that when it comes to a black and white film in Spanish about an indigenous woman, I just don't think that they would have released it widely. And so, like, I can understand the feeling that, oh, this kind of film shouldn't be considered, blah, blah, blah. But you leave so many people out of the picture when you do that. You cut out so many movies that people don't get to see. And so I think even just from an access standpoint, I'd have to disagree with that and say that now we're getting more content that's, female centric and telling different types of stories. There are some exceptions, like Parasite did have a theatrical release and did do really well, but I'm on his side in this instance because I think it, like you said, it kind of sets the tone going forward.
I think that when Netflix was first starting to do original programming, there was a lot of fear that because they had so much data, I mean, they know every time you stop watching something, they collect all of this information, that everything, every piece of media created by them would come through a formula of what people would want to watch, as opposed to taking, big gambles. But, lately they have given good amounts of money to major directors and say, like, go do what you want. Martin Scorsese, just go for it. Go do something that no studio would give you money to do. And here in this case, a rather large budget production for a film that, if you thought about it, like you, as you were checking the boxes, it meets not a single box of a commercial film that a studio head would think, my God, this is what we need to do. This is what my company needs to do to make our next quarter profits. So there's some guts that Netflix is doing to sort of, I think, get a level of credibility so that maybe other directors will see them as an outlet. So, and I think that this got a little bit of theatrical, I think really helps. So let's talk about like the black and white and the format. So what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think one thing is it's black and white, but it's filmed, for a 2018 film. It's not grainy. It's not meant to look aesthetically retro. It's like the movie itself is set in the 60s, but it looks very modern cinematically. So, he said that he always envisioned it being black and white. He did not want it in color. That was something he had to push back on because studios didn't want to do that, even Netflix. But I can't imagine this movie in color after seeing it the way that it was shot, and I don't want to imagine it that way. I just think it's perfect because it sets like a tone and a mood that you get the second it starts. Especially because like the first 3 minutes are just looking at the floor and the floor being washed, but it's so beautiful. And every frame of this movie is like a painting. And
Absolutely.
yeah, that's why I think it should stay black and
I want to come
white.
back to the beginning in just a moment, but I want to sort of stick on this for just a moment, because the look of it is really quite extraordinary. And if, for those of you who don't know, there's a documentary about the making of this called Road to Roma, and I was watching that today. And one of the things that's really amazing in that film is you see some of the shooting going on, and it's in color. So there are these scenes that you know from the film in black and white, and you see them in color, and it just is cognitively problematic. I mean, it just does not look good because
Hmm.
that this world is a black and white world. And the other thing which you said, which I just really want to embellish slightly, that most times when you see black and white in feature films today, it's to it is to emulate that black and white film look.
Hmm.
It is really about trying to give you a look like you were in a movie theater in the 60s. And he did not go for it. He wanted it to have this kind of memory and evoke a different time, but being without grain was just an incredibly fascinating choice that I thought. And the other thing is that it's really widescreen. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not widescreen, it's really widescreen. I think it is 2.39 to 1.
Wow.
Okay, so like normal, like old TV is 3 by 4, at one point, and so it's just like way wide. So this is like CinemaScope wide. This is like Sergio Leone wide, and the thing is that the wideness of it is really important because so much of the movie, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, is people
Hmm.
walking this way, walking that way. And because the frame is like this, the walking up the steps, the walking down the steps, the walking across the streets in all of those cities, all of those cityscapes, if they were in a traditional aspect ratio, they would not have the same evocative quality as they do in the way that it's shot, in my opinion.
I agree, and I think, he's a director that cares a lot. I mean, you probably saw in that documentary that he cares so much about the details, like the insane level of details. And so when you choose to do those really big wide shots, I mean, there's so much detail that's going on, like you said, people walking and people in the frame. And I've always really been drawn to movies and directors that can do that because I just think, what a nightmare. I mean, to have to, block all those people and all that motion and make sure everything's in the right place. And it truly is really beautiful to look at. And it's something that once you notice it, you really appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of his aesthetic from the other films that he made, and obviously um, from this one, he he's very much into mise en scène, like what's within the scene.
Hmm.
And there are many filmmakers who will do a lot of cut, quick cut, montage, and close-ups back and forth. But for him, which harkens back to Renoir and a lot of other great filmmakers who spend all this time building the tension of the blocking of the characters and the movement of what's coming within there. And so the manipulation is about creating the world which we come to see and experience. And yeah, and there's movement, intentional movement within the frame, and then movement of the frame. And some of those moving shots are absolutely, absolutely critical to the way, that he thinks about working with the image.
Mm.
And the other thing he said, this is all from that film, is for him, where was it talks about the sense of context for him is more important than subject. Like most filmmakers, the subject, the person talking, what they're saying is really important. And for him, the context of the world is really important, which why all of the, like everything in this film, every prop, every piece of cloth, every piece of tile was something from his childhood. There's a story in this doc where he's talking about they were trying to find this one piece of tile that they needed.
Oh,
And they were
yeah.
looking for a location, and they're sitting in the location. They go to the bathroom in the location. There's the tile. I need that tile. And that's how they got the tile. So it is like that much. Mark asked where to see the doc. The doc is on Netflix. It's called
Yeah.
uh, Road to Roma, and it's
Hmm.
definitely worth seeing. So let's start from the beginning. What do we think about that first shot, and how is that like not at all like any other first shot in any other movie you've ever seen?
Well, I mean, I think you kind of mentioned just the pacing of it. We look at the ground, I think it's for like a solid minute or a minute and a half or something like that. Then the water comes in, then we can see the reflection of an airplane in the water, which in that documentary you said there's a lot of airplanes because that was unavoidable. There were
Yeah.
constant airplanes where they were shooting, so they kind of worked them in. But then it pans up and it's on Cleo, and I feel like you're not expecting that. You're not expecting us to pull away from this really like mood setting, serious image. And then it's just a girl, cleaning a driveway. Um, I just feel like that says something about Cleo and about how she's perceived, but how this movie is going to tell her story.
It's not only how she's going to tell her story and what the story is about. I mean, how one opens your film like sets the universe of the expectations from your audience. And the pace of this film, the beauty of the shot, that you're looking into that shot, you see the plane in there and all those things. And it sort of says, okay, instead of like watching, like let me sit back and let this wash over me and feel this. And that shot like sets you up for the film and how it plays with you. It's really kind of, very important. And then you bring her in, and then you find out what this water is all about,
Mm-hmm.
which then says so much about, you know, like there's like what that does as a metaphor for so much.
Mm-hmm. And he loves water. One of his trademarks is water endings, because like this movie kind of has that. Y tu mama también had that. Gravity
Yeah.
had that. So there's this theme about water. It sort of begins and ends with that, just in different ways too, I think.
Yes, and life and death, which
Mm-hmm.
tend to appear in his films in many different kinds of ways. So let's talk about some scenes that you particularly like in this film.
Oh, it's hard to pick a scene. There's so many good ones. I think somebody in the chat, Raquel, mentioned the one with the paramilitary training
Oh
where
my
Cleo
gosh.
tracks down Furman. This is one of those scenes. I think the first time I saw it, there's a lot of stuff that happens in the movie that they don't explain. It's not explicitly told to us, because I think you're sort of supposed to be immersed and you're in it. And also, I think if you're Mexican from Mexico, then you know what's going on,
Mhm.
based on your country's history. But we in America don't necessarily know what's happening. And I have to say that after I really like that scene, but then after you get the historical context and going back to it, it amplifies it so much. But it's a really striking, they're all training with those bamboo sticks, and you're like, what is going on here? But oh yeah, and I didn't even notice that the first time, Raquel. But yes, when that guru guy or whatever is doing that pose,
Yeah,
and like nobody else can do it, but
except her.
Cleo does it.
Yes,
Yeah, and she
she's the
does
only.
it perfectly and
And it's
without saying anything. Yeah,
yes, which says so much. And
she
again,
doesn't
it's
brag
about
about it.
staging. It's like you have all
Mm-hmm.
these people like struggling, and she just very simply has that, and her eyes are on that, and we see all this other stuff. It kind of becomes visual noise. But the setup to that scene, like everything that happens before then,
Yeah.
she's in the bus, she's dropped off in the middle of no place. You have these little these wooden things to move here, and there's the kid with the head thing on at just in the middle of the street, and he's just walking. Then she finds the guy who's playing guitar in his shorts. So it's like getting to that is this whole incredible visual adventure. Every one of those moments is like just magnificent. And then so there's this anxiety. What's she going to say to him? How's he going to react? And before that, you get this maddening, crazy paramilitary with sticks thing, and these angry people, which certainly resonates with some angry people today.
Yeah, there's
Um,
a lot of scenes that do in this movie now, I think.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. But then not long after that, you get the scene in the furniture store, which like that scene out the window in the furniture store. Oh my
Yeah.
God. I mean, it's like that is a shot that is like in my head. It's just like, and you think about how many times do you think about like, how do you take a dramatic scene and like, in a sense, I wouldn't say throw away the drama, but you're not emphasizing the drama. Like, for example, amazing. Like I forgot about that when we watched it again the other night. When she's in the hospital and she looks at all of the maternity ward and she's just watching there, and all of a sudden like there's an earthquake and like the roof caves in, and it's like it's a non-scene scene. I mean, it's important, but it's like you're not making a big deal about the earthquake. It's how
Right.
it affects her.
It's
It's like,
metaphorical, I think, for what happens to her later. And
right.
there's a
And
couple scenes like that that really set the tone for what's going to happen to her when she has her baby.
right, which is,
Yeah.
sort of, I mean, the way that the whole film climaxes, the first time I saw it, I was just so absorbed by the moments that I
Hmm.
sort of didn't see the sort of building narrative structure as it
Same.
was
Yeah.
happening. And the second time through, it was like way more clear to me where this was all going. And I just
Hmm.
like was so enamored by the moments. Oftentimes in cinema, it's just like the visceral quality of watching these beautiful images and being immersed in those moments are like so much. Um, we should talk a little bit about Cleo and her character and how. And I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. You should really.
No, you're good.
Uh, no, really, it's in so much of cinema, and so many times when people complain about what we see in Hollywood films, are we don't see the everyday lives and people what their struggles are of just normalcy of the world that they're in. And I
Hmm.
think this film does that really well. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, one of my favorite scenes is actually the New Year's Eve party,
Mm,
because I think this movie does a really good job of. I don't think that everyone over here really understands that there is sort of like a class and race hierarchy in Mexico too. I think we over here have this image of what we think Mexicans look like, even, and it's like they look more, I think, like Cleo. That's our image of what all Mexicans look like.
mm,
But the reality is, just like over here, there's a lot of different types of people,
mm,
and just like over here, I mean, just to be completely blunt, the indigenous people are not treated the same way as the white people. And I think Alfonso, it's a story about his family, and his family is the sort of white, middle class family, and the indigenous people serve them essentially. And Cleo comes from this really tiny town. And I think in the behind the scenes, Alfonso talked about how his nanny told him that she remembers growing up being very hungry, being very cold, and all these, a completely separate world that he didn't know or understand or live in. And so in this movie, I think they do such a good job of showing where she comes from and how incredibly different. And I don't think there's no other scene that's as, polarizing, I think, as when they have that party and, they're all drinking and there's a Christmas tree and everything's great. And then her colleague kind of brings her down to another party and she goes into another room and it literally looks like another country almost. Right. And I think it looks, I don't know, just like it was from like 100 years ago or something. And you see how all these farmers, all these people that work the land, how they dress, how they look, and what they're going through. And like at the party, they're just talking about, they have their problems and issues and things that they're talking about. But down here, that's where we get like, and I didn't see this until the second time, but when Cleo talks about her baby and she's in a tough spot, her colleague says, oh, that's sad, but look at that guy over there. His son was killed last week in a land dispute. And that's something that's happening in the background of this movie, that the farmers are fighting to maintain their land, because I think the government at the time was basically taking it away from people and giving it to other people. And so they put them on these, I mean, in almost like slum-like conditions, which we see Cleo when she visits Furman later is in. Um, and so, they took everything from them and then now they're doing it again, taking even more things. And I think the middle class people could kind of ignore it because it was out in the countryside. And so, yes, there's violence and they kind of know about it, but they're sort of ignoring it until it starts coming into their backyard, quite literally that night, that with all that fire. And then later in the streets when, the violence is right in front of them. And Alfonso Cuaron said that was a time in Mexican history where people finally became like socially aware of that hierarchy and how those people were being treated. And I think the way Cleo's like demeanor in the whole movie, she's so quiet and so I mean, she almost never speaks. And even in like the most extreme scenes, like when Furman has that gun and like shoots someone, she almost doesn't react. It's like she's spent her whole life just sort of not allowed to emote. And I think it's so important that he picked someone that really did, fit that description. And it makes the movie that much more powerful because I was mentioning online that, one complaint I've always had about Hollywood is like you'll have movies like The Revenant where they'll have native people in the movie, but it's like they're only allowed to be in movies where it's 100 or 200 years ago, almost like they don't exist. But there's so many people today that are indigenous that do still exist, and there's so many stories you could tell about them. And so I think Cleo's character, that's like a really, even though it's not 100% modern because it's in the 60s, but hey, it doesn't look that different from today, and it doesn't look that different from how we treat people over here now that are maids and uh, help level people, people doing labor and those kind of jobs.
I really think that party scene with the two parties are the only place where like those the world where you see that sense of difference in such a profound and stark way. I think it was really kind of amazing. I also, the shots of those guys, mostly guys, one woman, just shooting the guns off in there.
Yeah, it's like a
It's
weird vibe to
so
that now.
absurd, and and it's like so incredibly the way it's visually set up. Of course, we never see what they're shooting at.
Yeah,
It's just like they're just shooting at
To
like
shoot.
nothing,
just for
whatever,
fun.
just
Yeah,
because. And but it's like what it says about them and their sense about the world in the way they do that. When somebody says a student from Mexico says that Roma wasn't an accurate picture of how indigenous people were treated.
maybe from
Interesting.
their perspective. I don't know.
Well, if we think about it, this is his vision from his memory,
True.
which is from his point of view, right?
Well,
It is
and
what he
from
observed,
and
and
from
yeah.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, but it's exactly,
Yeah.
and certainly who is he to say what somebody else's experience was, except to try to interpret that, which is a really difficult thing to do. And it's a hard thing, but he, I think, is trying to portray it in the way that he remembers and thinks of what her life is. And in a
Yeah.
sense, um, better to have had this film from at least his perspective than not to have any perspective at all for whatever its faults are.
For sure. And I would say from my own personal experience, I grew up here in America, but both my parents are Mexican, and there's definitely some, class distinctions and a desire to be lighter skinned, to be honest. Growing up, I was even told that, like, oh, you're so lucky, your skin's lighter. Like that's a thing in our culture. And I think it goes back really far, so I do think that it still exists.
Did you notice how many animals are in this film? It's like there's the dog that's
The
always
dog,
jumping out, the
yes.
jumping dog. There were in that scene with the New Year's Eve party. There's that room where there are all of those heads of the former dogs, which is very creepy.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I wonder what that symbolizes, like all those animals in the background. Very
Yeah,
accurate. Guatemala is even tougher than Mexico. Mm.
yeah, but
Um,
it
oh, and my parents, I can't get my dad to watch Roma for some reason, but my mother, she really enjoyed it. But she likes, you know, um, serious films that have something, social of social importance, or she likes things like that. My father would rather watch like Disney movies or something.
that was my father as well.
Yeah.
He liked 007 movies. That to him was he didn't understand anything that wasn't that.
Oh yeah, Raquel, I got him to watch Coco, and he did like that movie.
Well, it is a good
Which was
film.
a Disney movie.
Okay. What else do we want to talk about? there is so much. There was a scene in this documentary that to me was, all the technical stuff was really interesting. And by the way, one of the other things that was really great was watching the camera move from the scene in the ocean, which we will talk about in a minute, because that's a like very, that and the hospital scene I think are really important. We need to sort of address. But it's a scene when he gets into the car and they drive away, and when he's leaving, when he's like going away to that conference, when he's sort of getting out, and what he said was, as he was shooting, when he was shooting the scene, he was in a really bad mood,
Mm-hmm.
and he
Mm-hmm.
was angry, and he just at one point had to just like walk off the set and try to like deal with his emotion. And he thought he was mad at what was going on, like, you know, that there was something wrong with the film. And he was sitting himself and saying, they're letting me make this the way I want, they're letting me do everything, I'm getting to recreate to the minutest detail, what am I upset about? And then he said it came to him that what he was portraying in this film was the scene when he, like, his father is getting ready to go away and he's mad at his father.
Yeah.
It's not that anything in the film was wrong, but that he was having this experience and that was making him upset. And then he used that to talk to the actor about being emotionally smothered and what that moment was like. And then that performance became really powerful. And then he was in a better mood. Once he understood that what was getting him upset was what he was portraying and what it meant to him. And it gave him, not that he felt better about his father because he's mad at his father for the rest of his life, but at least he got to understand the emotion that his father was going through at that moment, which is a very real and profound thing.
I think the movie, it's so personal. I can't even imagine what that would be like to recreate the painful scenes from your childhood and try to process them at the same time as directing a huge movie. Um, but I also think that his film is very compassionate in the sense that there's really no bad guys in this movie. His father isn't necessarily a quote unquote villain. Even the Furman isn't either. I don't think anyone is. The mother, even though there's all these issues about, you know, class and family and abandonment and hurting people, the movie does such a good job, I think, of not necessarily judging them. It's like you're watching it from far away and you're close enough to understand their motivations, but you're not asked to like condemn anybody. And I thought that, you know, once he understood how his father felt, like you said, he doesn't have to morally say, oh, what he did was fine, leaving all of us was fine, obviously not, but to for a moment try to understand how he felt in that moment. And I think I really like films like that that don't need a big bad guy the whole movie to drive the plot forward. It gives everybody a chance to express like why they're in the position that they're in and how that affects other people and sort of a ripple effect, but not necessarily make someone, you know, quote unquote, look bad.
I think that sense of empathy, which you get from all of the characters, is both in the directing of the actors, but also in that visual style.
Yeah.
Of not having this close up, close up, close up.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you observe that and you feel that as part of what you're doing, and I think that's, you know, very powerful and very evocative. So let's talk about, what do you want to talk about first, the beach scene or the hospital scene?
Ooh, the hospital scene. This you probably saw from the documentary too, that there are no actors in that delivery room. The nurses, the gynecologist, the surgeon, they're all, you know, real medical staff. Because Alfonso said, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how to react in that moment. I don't know how to coach somebody. So they did like a dry run and he was like, yeah, this is good. Let's do this. And the doctors said that it's such like a muscle memory, and it's so similar to like when they actually are in that situation, that they sort of started to forget it was a movie. And I think you can really feel that energy in that scene. And then Cleo didn't know, actress didn't know that her baby was going to be stillborn. They kept that as a surprise, so her reaction is real. And then if you notice, even the staff, when she's upset and everything, they're reacting, they're crying, they're very human. And it just makes that whole scene so intense. I mean, I remember the first time I saw it, I was crying. And I don't have kids and I haven't been in that situation, but it was just, I felt everything she felt, I think, in that moment. They did such a good job of building that up. And in a weird way, I just felt like it was such an homage to what, doctors and nurses do, which I think is really on our minds right now.
Yeah, and the watching the doctor just sort of taking the dead baby and folding in a very careful way was just very, it was very powerful. It was just such a beautiful moment. And it was clear that, like you said, kind of muscle memory. This is clearly something that has been done before, but yet very moving and very
Mhm.
powerful. I mean, it's just, um, you know, writing that scene powerful, directing that scene. It just was in performance, or just, absolutely amazing.
Hey, Lisa,
Yep.
uh, I just realized that that scene didn't hit me quite the same way.
Ah,
I was pretty moved. I was moved, and and you knew somebody was going to die in this movie. So
yeah,
as a kid, later on at the beach, I thought it was the young boy, but
right.
um, I just realized that I think maybe because I was reading subtitles, that the staff seemed kind of mechanical
Oh, okay.
and not very involved. And I wasn't, it's hard because you're watching, especially on television, you're watching the subtitles, reading them, and you've also got to look at the performance. And maybe I just missed that.
I think the scene that really solidified it for me was when the doctor goes, "Say goodbye to her. Say goodbye to her now." That
Yeah.
part, that's when I like was crying, because I felt like, I don't know, I guess I just felt like he has had to do that before. And yeah, and she only had that quick second. Maybe there is something a little bit different about how they handled it versus how we might today. um Maybe it would be a little different, because it feels like in general Cleo lives, like, people aren't always very warm to her in general, so maybe that's part of it too. But yeah, I could see that too.
And I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier about class and how we kind of ignore that in America, and how this film says so much about class. And
Yes.
um, I have some family in Guatemala, and I've spent a lot of time there. And class is baked into the architecture in Guatemala.
Hmm.
A maid's room in a middle class or upper middle class house. Well, let me jump back. When Cleo is taking a shower, you see steam coming up in the shower. In a Guatemalan maid's room, it's only cold water, because that's what they had in their village. They never had hot water in their village. So architects assumed that when they came to the city, that would be fine. So it's
Yeah.
literally baked into the architecture. And
Wow.
the fact that indigenous for so many years had to step off the sidewalk to allow white or European people to pass, stuff like that. We don't have those. Maybe the distinctions aren't as black and white. Maybe that's the wrong term too in America.
Yeah, I think it's different, but it's still there. But yeah, I mean, even in my upbringing, like if you look at my two different families, my mother's side, her family has been over here a long time. And they had a totally different, she had a nanny growing up and things like that. And then on my father's side, my grandmother had like a third grade education, and that was it. And then she came over here with them and they had a completely different life. And I mean, even if you just looked at like, there are two different houses, You know, they had such a different experience. So I think maybe that's another reason why this movie feels so personal to me, because I can kind of see that even in my own life, and even in my own background. Again, they're both, you know, essentially from the same place, but really such different places. And I think it's cool to see a movie that explores that, you know, that there are such different sides to Mexico in general. And I think he did that a lot in Y Tu Mama Tambien as well, where there's like this theme of, to me in that movie, of just, you know, he puts himself as those two younger guy characters, or he's sort of in that class. There's all these horrible things happening around them in that movie that they barely even acknowledge, you know. And so he just has this theme, I think, in his movies of just, you know, bringing up the subject of class and race, but in a very subtle way where you're like noticing it, but they never, you know, the family isn't like horribly cruel to Cleo or, you know, cartoonishly mean to her. It's just, it's there. It's like the subtext of the film, I think.
When she tells her, I forgot the woman's name who employs her, the character. Anyway,
The mother, or
Mother.
yeah.
She tells her that she's pregnant.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The mother is totally supporting and know that she's going to take care of her. But I saw something in that scene that I didn't see the first time that I saw it. That little boy that she loves like a mother, because she's the one he puts in the bed and says, "I love you." He asks why Cleo is crying, and mother says she has a tummy ache. And he starts patting her tummy and saying, "Pain, pain, go away."
Yeah.
Pain, go away. It was a little childhood rhyme or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's very touching. I mean, clearly she has a very deep connection to them because she spends a lot of time with them.
Yeah, I think Alfonso said he wanted to write a movie about the woman that raised him, and he didn't mean his mother, you know, he meant her. And there's a lot of awkward tension. I think Raquel put in the chat, can you talk about the women in the film? The mother, who I think is always a good mother, is not always a nice person, very active, and in ways Cleo shows love, listening, carefully paying attention. But yeah, so I feel like in the movie there's some tension between her and Cleo, because she wants to always make it clear that she's actually the mother. Like there's that scene where they're all watching TV and the little boy grabs her hand. Like they're all watching TV and they're having a good time, and then he grabs her hand, and then the mom's like, "Can you get the doctor some tea?"
Yeah.
And it felt very much like there are times where she's part of the family, but then there's other times where they assert like sort of dominance over her, like they put her back in her place. Well, actually your job is get us tea, you know. And so there is like a weird tension throughout the film, even in the end, of, you know, when the mother is having a really hard time and with her husband, and when he's leaving and she's at her darkest moment, she's like, "Oh, we're in this together." But are they? You know, it's like, I think without making her seem like an evil, mean mom, because she's not, she's going through a lot, but she's going through all that from her perspective and her place, her status. So as bad as it is, it's nothing like what Cleo's going through, because yes, their father's leaving them, and that's horrible that he left them with, you know, all these children. That's terrible. But Cleo, you know, dated one guy ever, and he got her pregnant and immediately split, and she literally has zero options. She just has to hope that this family will take care of her, because she doesn't have that autonomy. She doesn't have that ability to take care of herself. And, you know, it is kind of an interesting part of the movie. Just, again, like, I think that when you watch it a second time, you notice all those scenes even more.
I just want to say one thing. I totally agree with you that you talked about earlier, that there are no villains in the film, but the scene with the father in the hospital where he has a
unreal.
That is, you know, he comes off as a villain in that moment in my
horrible
book, where he's not even going to show the empathy and compassion as a doctor to go into the delivery room and hold her hand. Like, okay, he's the
and then
villain.
he lies to her. He goes, "Oh, Cleo, you know, I can't go in there. I'm sorry." And then they go,
and then
"Actually,
the
you
doctor,
can."
yeah, right. And then we know the doctor who looks and says, "Well, no, you actually can come in there." And he goes, "No. I mean, the man, you know, is down a notch in that moment. I actually put in the chat just now something about Fellini. If I could have you guys talk a little bit about Fellini, because this is the third time I've seen this film. It's one of my all-time favorite films from the last 10 years. But this last time, I was thinking a lot about Fellini and how just that choice of naming this film Roma, right, is gonna, when people Google it years from now, it easily, you come up with Fellini's Roma. And we know, so it's in black and white, it's about memory. Fellini's interested in his childhood and memory in so many of his films. And then these weird little vignettes that you see, like the one that really, there's so many actually. For me, a Fellini-esque moment is when the guy in the crazy animal costume is singing during the fire.
Oh, right.
Like, wow, where's that come from? This like little moment that there's this fire going on. It's pure Fellini. None of these characters are developed, right? None of them are developed. They're just that dance scene too. So you've got music that comes on, you have drunken people, you've got the flirtatious moment where someone goes to flirt with the mother, and then she rejects him and he says, you're not even that hot. These are such Fellini moments. And so I was curious if anyone.
So there's one more that I actually realized when it's like got me onto this track. When they're in the car and they're trying to get to the hospital, it reminded me to the first shot of 8½.
Yeah, I see that too. Absolutely. And even just the fact that they walk out the door and there's a band, there's musicians walking down the street.
I kept wondering about that. I'm like, I don't know what the context is there, but I would love to know. They're like terrible, first of all. Like the music is not great. They're super young, and you know, I don't know. I guess it's something historical that I don't know about, but yeah, the way it punctuates and interrupts scenes, I just really. I love that.
And then so the movie theater scene, and then the next scene you see they're in maybe a hotel room, and he's nude. So Fairman is nude, standing there, very bold also, because then this film wouldn't be able to be shown in all context in terms of getting that with the full frontal nudity. And then he's performing this martial arts, but you don't really know what it is yet.
Yeah.
It's very Fellini to me as well. I don't know.
It is interesting too that like all those scenes, as wild as some of them seem the first time, when you do get that context, you're like, oh, like, you know, you understand what's going on later, and it definitely enhances like a second viewing too, but it doesn't take away from how like surprising and visually striking it is.
Yeah, but to name the film Roma, right? Like you could pick a different title and it would still be his childhood memories about Cleo and being raised. It just it seems like he knows this is going to be a lifelong connection.
Yeah, or maybe that was the part of town he was from, and that resonated. But clearly, I think, you know, there are people who do homages just to show you that they know things, and there are people who like create it and make it their own, but sort of just kind of refer to the richness of it. So to me, it's like adding a little spice to something to give it a kind of different, you know, resonance that I think works really nicely in each one of those moments. Also, the leader of the guys out in the field, like, who's doing that, his kind of crazy dance, and was kind of Fellini-esque in a sense. You know, but there are a lot of those kind of crazy moments. Leslie, do you want to talk about your point here?
Oh, well, we were just talking about how he was reminding us of, you know, other filmmakers, and I have to believe he's probably seen a lot of Sanjit Ray's films, because, you know, and we're talking about class and cast, and, you know, he's the great Indian filmmaker, much older, you know, another generation, but same kind of thing. A lot of the observation, you know, very quiet, taking the camera and stepping back, and, you know, and you know, I'm certainly no expert on him or anything, but it just sort of flashed through my mind. It reminded me a lot of his, and the simple stories about people, and focusing, and family, and you know, simple things that happen, and then what happened to them because of those things as well. So it just the styling and the pace and everything reminded me of Sanjit Ray. So,
And you know, thinking back to Fellini, I can imagine Fellini having a scene where all these people were just shooting, and you don't know what they're shooting at. I mean, that would be very much of a way. And if you think about Fellini's Roma, particularly, I mean, Roma is about his remembrance of his childhood. I mean, that is what that film is about. And in a sense, that's what he's doing here. So I do think it's purposeful.
It's funny though that in the behind the scenes he was like, this time in this movie I freed myself from copying anybody's shots ever at all, and it's just so funny that you guys are bringing up all the things that are clearly influenced by it, but you can't help but be influenced even if you set out to not be. It's clearly there. So
when people say there are no new stories, could you say in photography there are no new shots?
Maybe so. And isn't he this like the first time that he was his own cinematographer too? Isn't that what happened? He had the cinematographer with him, but eventually he took control of the project, I think is what I read. Because I think he's credited as the cinematographer
and co-editor. Yeah, I mean, there are people who, you know, have a strong visual sensibility, which he clearly does. I mean, he knows exactly what it is. I mean, how many times do you see like the light coming in just this amazing place off of the water or in the background? It's just like, and shooting exteriors and getting to be expressionistic in exteriors is not an easy thing, especially when you have a whole lot of extras moving around. So to wait for the sun to be in that exact right place is really something. Gordon, you had a joke you wanted to tell us.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Got the phone here. It's not a joke. I want to tell you there's an in-joke in the movie that I appreciate a lot when the kids go see an American 1969, maybe it was released a year later in Mexico, Marooned, which is an obviously was Cuarón's inspiration for making Gravity, because it's almost the same story.
You're right. I didn't even notice that. Wow.
Marooned, although it looks very cheesy now, won the Oscar for special effects for 1969. And of course, Gravity just absolutely revolutionized that. It's basically the same story. And I really enjoyed seeing that. I mean, a lot of people might have wondered, what's that? Why is that in there? And I got it the first time I saw it.
That's so cool. I did not notice that.
Anytime you see a film made by a filmmaker and there's a film in it or a type of film that they're watching,
it's got to mean something.
There's always like something.
Cuarón, by the way, because I'm a big Oscar trivia nut, he was the first guy to win both directing and cinematography Oscar.
That's insane. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then then I have a question. What was the film that with the two men kissing the woman in the middle? I think she was dressed like a nun. What was that? Does anybody know?
The one they see in the big theater?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to look that up. It is a French comedy about a World War II comedy with Terry Thomas, and it's a French title I cannot pronounce correctly, but it's a real movie, because I'm always real particular about seeing movies within movies, what the reference is to that. So I'm guessing it's something he actually saw. It was a big hit in France. It's from like 69 or something like that.
I got out of that scene like, you know, Cleo's going through this incredibly different experience from the woman on screen who has like these two men really interested in her and kissing her and she's beautiful, and then Cleo is experiencing like being pregnant and him seemingly disinterested and leaving her there. That's what I got out of that scene. But it would be
afterwards when she's sitting on the steps in front of the theater and all that madness is going on around her with the vendors.
Noise and all that stuff that's going on.
Bart, we know you're dying to talk about the ocean scene, and you got to do it before we leave.
Oh yeah, we're at like 8:24 already.
Dollar shot maybe ever done.
Well, I mean, the film in a sense builds to this moment. you know, and you know, it starts that the whole. First of all, I just love the whole trip was set up. They have to leave. Oh, one of the things we didn't talk about, like she was whatever you could say about her as a mother and as a person. She was a horrible driver.
Oh yeah, I remember she
I-
kept saying this.
Couldn't get through. Like, so she had to get a
It-
smaller car so she could get it into the driveway.
I love that detail too. The first time
The
she
way it
just,
was shot, it was just like
yeah,
in both of the time. First getting into there, and then between those two cars, and
you could tell it was like a car he bought that she just always hated, and like that hate started to come out as their relationship dissolved, I think.
but
She
you
couldn't wait to get rid of it.
something like that. I don't think is a cinematic invention. I bet that really happened.
Yes,
Because
I
when
bet
you're a
his
little
mom
kid, that's a
did
kind
that.
of thing you remember forever.
Yeah.
And you talk about like over a drink 20 years later, right? Well, I mean, that scene is it's important. It builds, but visually, that we're just all in one shot. I mean, we all know from his other films, um, the children film, there's like the way he could do so much over one shot, over one take, but into the water, like going back and forth into that. And again, if you look at this documentary, you can see the crane shot as it's moving back and forth, which is really kind of a wonderful. It makes you kind of think of it differently. And again, you're seeing it in color, which is also cognitively problematic for me. Um, but it just the way that it's set up and the way they're going back and forth and what it means in the end that she is able to, in a way which she can swim, which she says, and the actress also portraying her could not swim, has to go in there after losing her child to save another child, is like, you know, a beautiful ending. And then when they're together there holding their hand, you know, in that scene, that moment when there is a sense of togetherness, it really is the epitome of, I think, what we were talking about before. She's part of the family. She's clearly emotionally, in some sense, part of the family, but not part of the family because
Yeah.
she has to work every moment when they're home.
That's class.
Yeah.
She is
Mhm.
always working. She has to go fold the laundry, go up and do the laundry up in that, you know, place. Everybody else is doing what they're doing, and she never is not working.
The other thing that happens
Yeah.
in that moment is she admits that she didn't want the baby.
I thought
Yeah.
that was such a powerful scene and such a interesting theme that he introduced, so incredibly empathetic because, you know, she didn't, she even says poor little thing. Like you can tell she feels so guilty. She almost like she willed that to happen. But you know, as a viewer, we're like, she's in such a horrible position. She wasn't really seriously dating that guy. He took advantage a little bit and then he split. And I mean, you can even understand why he split though, because I mean, look at the level that they were both at. They couldn't really raise that kid very well. Um, I mean, they would struggle very hard, I guess you could say. And now she's thinking like, how is this going to go the rest of my life? And then, you know, this tragedy happens, but she can't help but feel relieved just because she would have such a hard time doing that alone. And she feels so bad about it. And the mother is so like seems to instantly understand how she feels and like is so compassionate towards her too. And it was like, yeah, she had to have that really visceral moment where she saves those kids to like finally say that out loud. Maybe she felt like that closeness to them for the first time where she really felt like she could actually tell them why she was sad, why she was upset.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that both of the women are dismissed, you know, by the males in their life, even though they're at different,
I would say that's a
like
theme.
different class status.
Yeah, but I would say that's a theme in like Latin cinema too. I mean, I've seen
Right.
like a lot of movies. I'm thinking of like Voltaire,
Mm.
and some other films where there's a theme of like the men leaving the women. Like there's definitely like a gender thing of like, yeah, they're the head of the family, but they don't necessarily have all the same, you know, rights and status, I think.
Not
And
just
I feel like,
that's
yeah,
life.
yeah.
I think even I kept coming up with the word dismiss, like she's dismissed a lot, her needs,
Yeah.
her wants, her desires. And then Cuarón takes and makes this whole film about her.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's like, wow.
That's the powerful part to me. It's like this person who's been dismissed her whole life, or this whole working life anyway, she's the center of the film. And so,
Yeah, and that scene on the beach too, when she saves the children and the mom, as she runs up, she's like, "What happened?" Like at first she's kind of mad, but remember, she kind of left them there. She's like, "I have to go do
Absolutely.
stuff on the car.
Yeah.
You watch the kids, regardless of the fact that this is kind of dangerous. Goodbye." And then she comes back, and at first her first instinct is to kind of start yelling at Cleo again, like we've seen a lot in the movie. But then she has that moment of like, "Oh my gosh, Cleo can't even swim." And she saved my children. And she looks her like, I think Cleo's like in frame, she's a little bit higher than her in the frame too, and she says thank you to her. And it's like the first time I think in the movie where Cleo is like truly recognized for all of her contributions in the movie.
So I came a little late, and I don't know whether I apologize if you mentioned this already, but
Oh, no.
my favorite shot, which addresses what you're talking about right now, is when she's lying on the roof after doing the
Oh,
laundry
yeah.
and bathed in beautiful light, and there's the transparency of the clothing, and he says, "I'm dead," and she says, "I'm dead." Boy, it feels good being dead. You know why? Because she's at rest, right? So she's not working. She slows down, and this feels pretty good being dead. It's such an amazing, at that moment, I feel like it's I don't know if it's a premonition of the rest of the film, but that
You mean
she's
that shot?
front and center. Well, what she's
Yeah.
saying too.
Yeah. Well, he felt really dismissed in that scene because his brother was like, you're a weenie or whatever, and leaves him there. And she comes over and
Yeah.
comforts him. And it's like, in a weird way, they're sort of on the same level in that
They're
moment.
connecting. But
Yeah.
again, it's like it's connecting, but one person is working and one person is just there. Like,
Yeah.
and that moment really solidifies that sense of class difference, but yet connecting. I mean, she really honestly feels connected to these kids, and these kids feel very deeply connected to her.
Well, and the mom too said like, this is her vacation, so y'all can't make her work, but she does anyway. Again, that class thing of like, she says that in theory, but really, even in the beach scene, technically, she's like, watch the kids while I do something else. She has to work.
It was clearly she knew in that moment when she says you don't have to, you're not going to work, and she knew that was not
she was like
there's no way.
She's like, I'm just going on this trip to watch these kids, I know that.
Yeah, she's going there for the ice cream.
Mhm.
So you want to talk about the last scene, which is a good way to end this, the very last shot, because we start off talking about the first shot, which is really
Mhm.
evocative, the water and the shit, the cleaning the shit, and that as
Can I say too that dog poop is a problem the whole movie? I think they just gave up after a while because they keep getting mad at her for not cleaning it, but you
Right.
see dog poop all over the place the whole movie. She
Yeah.
never quite cleans it all up, which I think is kind of funny.
And then we end as so many times through the film, you see her walking up and down the steps
Mhm.
constantly. And again,
Oh yeah,
with
and
that
they're
wide
high.
screen, it's really constant. And in the very last scene, she's just kind of walking. There's the sun is up there, and just very kind of slowly, she's walking up all the way up and around. And it just sort of like, we started here, we ended up here. Things have happened, people have understood things, but people are still in the same place they were in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I think that, like you said, there's a lot of steps and in a lot of movies that does, I think, represent, class and distinction and things like that. And so, yeah, it's like she kind of went up a little bit. But yeah, she goes back to the same house, and it, like you said a minute ago, it kind of invokes that first scene with the boy. Now we kind of get a different vantage point of where they were, because in the beginning she was like, your mom doesn't want you to be up here, to the kids. And then when you see how far she has to walk up, I'm like, oh, no wonder she didn't want those children to go up all those steps. It looks super dangerous. But yeah, I think it says a lot about where the movie begins and ends.
Indeed. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. Lisa, thank you so much. So people who
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you for having me. Oh my
Great.
gosh, this was so fun. You have
Your
no idea how
podcast.
badly I've been wanting to talk about this.
Your podcast.
I love the clap.
That's great.
I love that movie, and you
Yep.
can find that any place where you get podcasts. So if you enjoyed this, you will definitely enjoy more of them. Please go and subscribe and listen. Your next podcast is who?
So this Saturday, I'm releasing an episode about Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, a very nostalgic film for me and for my guests. So it's going to be a lot of us just like reminiscing about the 80s and early 90s. So if you enjoy that, come listen to that. Oh yeah, Gordon, we need to do one too soon. And actually, anyone listening, if you want to come on my show, please, you're welcome to come on.
So next week, I'm not sure that we're going to be doing one. I think so, but I have surgery on Monday morning. I'm getting a brand new right knee. The old one was not working as well as it should. Too much bone, not enough cartilage. And I'm assuming that I'll feel good enough to do this, but if I'm in extreme pain, which I don't think is going to happen, I may not do it. But I'll be planning for this, and I will let you all know. So read the newsletter, and you will find out what we're going to do. One way or another, we will have this figured out.
Thank you,
Good
Bart.
luck. Good luck
Thank
with
you.
your
Thank
surgery,
you.
Bart. Good luck,
Thank
Bart.
you.
Yeah.
Another,
good
another
luck.
great one.
Thank you.
Guys,
Yeah,
thank you so
terrific.
much.
Thank you.
This was a wonderful discussion. We'll have this online probably about an hour. It takes. I got to download it and then upload it. You know, tell folks about this. It's a wonderful. I really thoroughly enjoyed this. I really enjoyed looking at the film again. It was really wonderful. Oh, Raquel says we're going to do Flannery next week.
No, tomorrow.
Oh, we're
Go
going.
it's plain. We're
Okay.
doing Portrait of a Lady next week, but
Okay. Oh,
tell them about the Flannery screening tomorrow. Just go to our Facebook page. It's
okay. So for those of you who might have missed the film Flannery, which we showed at DocuFest, it's a wonderful film about Flannery O'Connor, truly magnificent film, and it's being distributed on these virtual cinema platforms. I know you've seen like the Alamo, Texas Theater, all these places have them. Well, they wanted to have it available, and so for a long time, I've resisted doing these because I want the Texas Theater to survive. I want all these other places to survive, and I don't want to sort of compete. But in this case, they didn't want to run this movie, so we want you to have access to this movie. So we're making this available. You can get it on our website. And I think we're going to do another one soon, right, Raquel?
yes, I gotta do the details. Yes.
Okay. So we're working on that. So it's not like we're trying to do this as a business model. We're doing this as a service to make these films available that you otherwise might not be able to see.
Okay.
So check out everything. Will be in the newsletter. We're pretty good at letting you know what's going on as best we know. So guys, thank you. Have a great evening. MB, have a great second dinner.
Bye, MB.
For the rest of you, have a great first dinner. Jim, it's wonderful to see you again. Have a great week. We'll see you later. Thank you all. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank
Thanks, Bart.
you.
Lisa,
Bye.
you were
Thank you, Bart.
awesome.
Thank you, ladies.
Yes,
Oh,
awesome.
thank you so
Absolutely
much. Y'all are
awesome.
too nice. Thank you for having me.